Security removed this vagrant from first class. People like him belong in cargo with the livestock.
Victoria Blackwell's voice cut through the quiet luxury of Metropolitan Airport's most exclusive space like a blade through silk. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at Marcus Thompson, who was sitting peacefully in a leather armchair checking his phone for updates about his grandmother's condition at Chicago General Hospital. Before we dive into this story that exposed an entire industry's hidden biases, I want to know where you watching from tonight. And if you believe respect should never depend on your bank account or appearance, hit subscribe and share this story. Because what happened next will remind us all that dignity isn't designer, it's earned. Marcus looked up slowly from his phone, his dark eyes meeting Victoria's piercing blue gaze with a calm that would have unnerved most people. But Victoria Blackwell wasn't most people. At 38, she had climbed her way to VIP lounge manager through 15 years of what she called maintaining standards, and what others might call something far less charitable. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a flawless chignon, not a strand out of place despite the chaos of a busy Friday evening at one of America's busiest airports. Her charcoal business suit was tailored to perfection, hugging curves that she wasn't shy about displaying. The red lipstick was freshly heels sharp enough to be weapons, and the smile she wore was as cold as winter wind off Lake Michigan. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to being questioned simply for existing in spaces others assumed he didn't belong. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Victoria's smile widened, but it never reached her eyes. Those eyes were calculating, assessing, making judgments based on the faded jeans Marcus wore, the simple black t-shirt that had seen better days, and the worn sneakers that had carried him through countless late nights building the company that had made him one of the youngest self-made multimillionaires in America. "I am sure there has been," Victoria replied, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that comes from someone who has confused authority with superiority. "This is a private club, sir, members only. I'm going to need to see your membership credentials." The Elite Sky VIP Lounge was a temple to modern luxury, all marble surfaces and leather furniture floor-to-ceiling windows, offering panoramic views of the runway where private jets and commercial aircraft moved like expensive toys. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over businessmen in $1,000 suits and women dripping in jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. Marcus reached into his back pocket with movements so smooth and unhurried that they seemed to frustrate Victoria further. He pulled out a wallet made of simple black leather, no designer logos or flashy statements, just quality craftsmanship that would last a lifetime. From it, he extracted a black titanium card that caught the light like obsidian. "Elite Sky Black Card, Marcus," said simply, holding it out for Victoria's inspection. "Lifetime membership." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she examined the card, turning it over in her perfectly manicured hands as if searching for evidence of forgery. The card was real. Marcus could see that she knew it was real, but something in her expression suggested that reality was less important than maintaining her narrative. "Anyone could have this card," she said finally, her voice rising, just enough that other passengers began to glance their way. "We've had issues with stolen cards, fraudulent access. I'm going to need additional verification." Marcus felt his phone buzz against his leg and glanced down to see another urgent message from the hospital. His grandmother's condition had worsened. The woman who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12, who had worked 3 jobs to put him through college, who had believed in him when he was just a kid with a laptop and a dream, she was slipping away while he sat in an airport lounge being treated like a criminal for the crime of not looking like what Victoria expected wealth to look like. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice still calm, but carrying an edge that anyone paying attention would recognize as barely controlled frustration. "I need to catch my flight to Chicago. My grandmother is in the hospital, and I'd appreciate if we could handle this quickly." Victoria's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Everyone has emergencies, sir. Protocol is protocol. I'm going to need to verify your identity and run a background check on this membership." From across the lounge, Richard Palmer looked up from his Wall Street Journal with the expression of a man who had found unexpected entertainment. At 55, Palmer represented old money in its purest form, inherited wealth, inherited prejudices, and inherited certainty that the world operated according to rules that people like him had written. Finally, he said, his voice carrying across the space with the confidence of someone who had never been told to lower it someone's checking credentials. The standards in these lounges have really declined lately. Several other passengers turned to watch the unfolding drama. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact. Others leaned forward with the hunger of people who enjoyed watching someone else's discomfort. A young woman in business attire pulled out her phone, not to film, not yet, but to have it ready. Victoria basked in the attention like a flower turning toward sunlight. This was her domain, her stage, and she was the director of this particular performance. Security policy requires thorough verification of questionable memberships, she announced, her voice pitched to carry throughout the lounge. Marcus looked around the room, taking in the faces that stared back at him. Some curious, some hostile, some embarrassed to be witnessing what was happening, but not brave enough to speak up. He had seen these expressions before in boardrooms and conference halls at industry events and exclusive restaurants. The look of people who couldn't reconcile his appearance with his presence, who needed explanation for why he was there. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Dr. Patricia Williams, his grandmother's doctor. Marcus glanced at Victoria, who was now making a show of examining his driver's license under the light as if she were a forensics expert. "I need to take this call," Marcus said. "It's about my grandmother. All calls can wait until this matter is resolved," Victoria replied without looking up from the license. "We can't have disruptions during a security verification." Marcus felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. His grandmother, Eleanor Thompson, the woman who had taught him that respect was earned through character, not currency, was fighting for her life 90 miles away. And here he sat being humiliated by someone who confused a title with true authority. He looked at Victoria Blackwell, really looked at her, and saw something that made him sad rather than angry. Here was a person so insecure in her own worth that she needed to diminish others to feel elevated. Someone who had mistaken power for character and authority for respect. "You know what," Marcus said, quietly settling back into his chair with the kind of stillness that comes before storms. "Take all the time you need." Marcus Thompson hadn't always been worth $500 million, but he had always been worth respect. Growing up in Chicago's South Side with his grandmother after losing his parents, he learned early that dignity wasn't something you could purchase. It was something you carried inside yourself regardless of your zip code or bank balance. Eleanor Thompson had worked as a cleaning lady at the University of Chicago, arriving before dawn to empty trash bins and scrub floors in buildings where future leaders debated theories about poverty from the comfort of heated lecture halls. She came home each night with aching feet and stories about the brilliant young minds she observed from the shadows as students who had every advantage, but often lacked the grit that comes from necessity. "Marcus," she would tell him as they shared dinner at their small kitchen table, "education is the only thing they can't take away from you. But character, that's what you build when nobody's watching." At 14, Marcus was building computers from spare parts he found in university dumpsters, teaching himself programming languages while his grandmother worked night shifts. By 16, he was tutoring college students in computer science. By 18, he had earned a full scholarship to Northwestern University, where he studied computer engineering and entrepreneurship with the single-minded focus of someone who understood that opportunity might knock only once. Next-Gen Analytics started in his dorm room with $500 borrowed from his grandmother's emergency fund and a vision for artificial intelligence that could revolutionize how businesses understood their customers. While his classmates partied on weekends, Marcus coded until his eyes burned, building algorithms that could predict consumer behavior with uncanny accuracy. The company's first client was a small restaurant chain struggling to understand why some locations thrived while others failed. Marcus's AI analyzed everything from foot traffic patterns to social media sentiment to local demographic shifts, providing insights that helped the chain increase profits by 40% in 6 months. Word spread quickly through Chicago's business community. By his junior year, Marcus was running NextGen from a cramped office above a pizza shop, employing fellow students and recent graduates who shared his vision. By graduation, the company was handling analytics for Fortune 500 companies, providing insights that drove millions of dollars in increased revenue. The acquisition offer from Datacore Industries came when Marcus was $500 million for a company he had built from nothing. Eleanor Thompson cried when he told her not from happiness about the money, but from pride in watching her grandson prove that excellence knew no color, no zip code, no family history. Marcus could have retired then, could have bought houses and cars and all the symbols that people associate with wealth. Instead, he reinvested everything into sustainable technology companies, green energy startups, and scholarship funds for first-generation college students. Wealth, he had learned from watching his grandmother, wasn't about what you accumulated. It was about what you contributed. That philosophy extended to how he lived his life. Marcus drove a 5-year-old Toyota Camry because it was reliable and efficient. He lived in a modest condo in Lincoln Park because it was close to the office and had good public transportation. He wore jeans and T-shirts because they were comfortable and practical. The expensive suits stayed in his closet for board meetings and formal events. People often mistook his simplicity for lack of sophistication, his humility for lack of success. Airport lounges like this one were filled with individuals who performed wealth rather than possessed it, who needed expensive logos and flashy accessories to announce their importance to the world. Marcus had learned long ago that real power didn't need to announce itself. Real wealth didn't require validation from strangers. Real success was measured not by what you could buy, but by what you could build, whom you could help, and how many lives you could improve. His business philosophy was simple. Treat every employee like family, every customer like a partner, and every competitor like a teacher. NextGen's corporate culture was legendary in Silicon Valley. Unlimited vacation time, comprehensive healthcare, on-site childcare, and profit sharing that made even entry-level employees feel like owners. When Marcus walked into a room, he didn't demand respect, he earned it through competence, kindness, and authentic leadership. He remembered names, asked about families, celebrated achievements, and supported people through difficulties. His success wasn't just financial, it was human. That humanity is what made moments like this so painful. Victoria Blackwell saw his casual clothing and made assumptions about his character, his intelligence, his right to occupy space she considered exclusive. She couldn't see past surface appearances to recognize the man who had built one of America's most innovative companies, who employed thousands of people, who had donated millions to educational charities. But this wasn't about Marcus's feelings being hurt. This was about something deeper and more dangerous, the casual cruelty that people in positions of minor authority could inflict on those they perceived as beneath them. How many people had Victoria humiliated who didn't have the resources to fight back? How many travelers had been made to feel unwelcome, unwanted, unworthy, simply because they didn't fit her narrow definition of what success looked like? Marcus's phone continued to buzz with updates from the hospital. His grandmother's condition was deteriorating, but the flight to Chicago had been delayed due to weather. Every minute he spent in this lounge being treated like a suspected criminal was a minute he might never get back with the woman who had shaped him into the man he had become. Eleanor Thompson was 84 now, her body failing even as her mind remained sharp. She had lived to see her grandson become successful beyond her wildest dreams. But more importantly, she had lived to see him become the kind of man she could be proud of, generous, humble, dignified under pressure. Never let anyone make you small, baby, she had told him just last week during his visit to Chicago. But don't ever make yourself big by making someone else small. That's the difference between power and character. Sitting in the Elite Sky VIP lounge watching Victoria Blackwell perform her petty tyranny for an audience of strangers, Marcus remembered those words. He could end this confrontation with a single phone call, could have Victoria fired before his flight took off. But doing so would prove her point that power was about what you could do to people rather than what you could do for them. So Marcus sat quietly monitoring updates about his grandmother's condition, while Victoria Blackwell unknowingly dug herself deeper into a hole that would define the rest of her career. Sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice wasn't immediate retaliation. It was patient documentation of how people revealed their character when they thought they were safe from consequences. Marcus Thompson had learned patience from his grandmother, who had waited decades for opportunities that came slowly to people like them. But he had also learned that patience wasn't passivity, it was strategic preparation for moments when action would have maximum impact. That moment was coming. Victoria returned Marcus's identification documents with the theatrical precision of someone accustomed to being watched. Her movements were deliberately slow, each gesture designed to communicate her authority and his questionable status in her domain. "Mr. Thompson," she said, drawing out his name as if testing its authenticity. "I've reviewed your documentation, and while the cards appear genuine, we've had incidents recently with sophisticated forgeries. I'm going to need additional verification before I can allow you to remain in the lounge." Marcus glanced at his phone again, another message from Dr. Williams. His grandmother's blood pressure was dropping. The gentle woman who had raised him with infinite patience was fighting for each breath while he sat here being treated like a criminal by someone who couldn't see past his appearance to recognize his character. "What additional verification do you need?" Marcus asked, his voice maintaining its careful calm despite the storm building inside him. "I've provided my membership card, driver's license, and credit cards. What else would satisfy your concerns?" Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. She was clearly enjoying this performance, savoring the attention from other passengers who had turned their chairs to better observe the confrontation unfolding before them. "Well," she said, drawing out the word like a cat playing with caught prey, "we could start with proof of how you obtained this membership. Elite Sky Black cards cost $50,000 annually plus a $100,000 initiation fee. Perhaps you could explain how someone in your—" She paused, letting her gaze travel deliberately from his sneakers to his t-shirt. Circumstances acquired such expensive privileges. The question hung in the air like poison gas. Around the lounge, conversations stopped mid-sentence as passengers strained to hear Marcus's response. Some looked uncomfortable with Victoria's obvious implications, but not uncomfortable enough to intervene. Others leaned forward with the hungry expression of people who enjoyed watching someone else's humiliation. Richard Palmer folded his newspaper with crisp efficiency and turned fully toward the unfolding drama. "It's a fair question," he announced to the room, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his opinions received as facts. "These memberships aren't exactly accessible to everyone. I'd be curious about the answer myself." Marcus felt something cold and deadly settle behind his eyes. He had faced this question in various forms throughout his career, the subtle suggestion that his success was somehow illegitimate, that people like him didn't naturally belong in spaces like this. The assumption that he must have cheated, lied, or stolen his way into circles that others considered their birthright. "I earned it," Marcus said simply, "the same way anyone earns anything through work achievement and success." Victoria's laugh was melodious and cruel. "Of course, sir. I'm sure you worked very hard." The word hard carried enough sarcasm to power the airport's lighting. "But you understand our position. We have to protect our members from fraudulent access. Perhaps you could provide bank statements, employment verification, tax records." The request was so outrageous that several passengers actually gasped. A young woman in business attire, Amanda Foster, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her phone now openly recording despite lounge policies against filming. "Ma'am," Amanda said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I don't think you can legally request someone's financial records just to use a lounge they've already paid for." Victoria's head snapped toward Amanda with the speed of a striking snake. "I beg your pardon. I'm saying this seems excessive," Amanda replied, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "He's shown you his membership card and identification. What you're asking for is beyond any reasonable verification process." Miss Victoria said, her voice dropping to a register that could freeze water. "I don't recall asking for commentary from other passengers." This is a security matter that requires proper handling by authorized personnel. Authorized personnel who are completely overstepping their authority, Amanda shot back. I'm a lawyer, and what you're doing right now is creating liability for your company. The word lawyer hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her perfectly composed expression cracked slightly, revealing the uncertainty beneath her authoritative facade. But rather than backing down, she doubled down with the desperate energy of someone who had committed too much to retreat gracefully. Security Victoria called toward the lounge entrance, her voice pitched to carry throughout the space. I need immediate assistance with a disruptive passenger situation. Marcus remained seated, his hands folded in his lap, his expression unchanged. But anyone watching closely would have noticed the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers pressed together with just enough force to show white at the knuckles. I haven't been disruptive, Marcus said quietly. I've answered every question, provided every document you've requested, and complied with every demand you've made. The only person being disruptive here is you. The truth of that statement was so obvious that several passengers nodded in agreement. Marcus had indeed been the picture of cooperation, while Victoria had escalated each interaction into something larger and more confrontational. Jessica Rivera appeared at the lounge entrance, her security coordinator badge gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. She was young, maybe 29, with the nervous energy of someone trying to balance multiple competing loyalties. Her Hispanic heritage was evident in her dark eyes and olive complexion, but her allegiance was clearly to her supervisor. What's the situation, Miss Blackwell? Jessica asked, her hand resting unconsciously on the radio clipped to her belt. This gentleman is using what appears to be a fraudulent membership card. Victoria explained, her voice now carrying the theatrical weight of someone playing to a larger audience. He's refused to provide adequate verification of his identity or financial capacity to maintain such an expensive membership. Jessica looked at Marcus, then at the documentation spread across the side table. Elite, Sky Black Card Illinois driver's license, American Express Centurion card business cards from Next Gen Analytics with Marcus's name and CEO title clearly visible. Sir Jessica said carefully, I'm going to need to ask you some questions about how you obtained these memberships. Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time he looked at the screen long enough to read the full message. Mr. Thompson, your grandmother is asking for you. Her condition is critical. Please call as soon as possible. Dr. Williams. When Marcus looked up, his eyes held something that made both Victoria and Jessica take an unconscious step backward. Not anger, something colder and more controlled than anger. Something like the calm before thunder. My grandmother is dying, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent lounge with perfect clarity. She raised me after my parents were killed in a car accident when I was 12. She worked 3 jobs to put me through college. She's the reason I'm successful, and she's the reason I'm flying to Chicago tonight. He stood slowly, his movement so controlled and deliberate that it commanded attention from every person in the room. I've shown you my identification, my membership cards, my business cards, and my credit cards. I've answered your questions politely and completely. I've complied with every request you've made, no matter how unreasonable or inappropriate. Marcus's voice remained calm, but it carried a weight that seemed to press against the walls of the luxurious space. What I won't do is provide my tax records, bank statements, or financial documentation to satisfy your curiosity about whether someone who looks like me deserves to be in the same room as someone who looks like you. The silence that followed was so complete that the only sounds in the lounge were the distant hum of air conditioning and the muffled announcements from the concourse outside. Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. She had expected Marcus to become angry, defensive, aggressive reactions that would have justified escalating the situation further. Instead, he had responded with such dignity and controlled authority that she looked petty and small in comparison. Victoria began, but Marcus held up one hand. I'm going to call my grandmother's doctor now, he said, because that's what matters. Not your insecurities, not your prejudices, and certainly not your need to perform authority for an audience of strangers. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed Dr. Williams's number. As the call connected, He looked directly at Victoria with an expression that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed professional facade to the frightened, insecure person underneath. Dr. Williams Marcus said when the call connected, "It's Marcus Thompson. I got your message about my grandmother." The conversation that followed was brief and devastating. Eleanor Thompson was conscious but fading. Her heart was struggling. The doctors were doing everything they could, but time was running out. Marcus ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. When he looked up, every person in the lounge was staring at him with expressions that ranged from sympathy to shame to growing anger at Victoria's treatment of a man facing family tragedy. "Now," Marcus said quietly, "I'm going to board my flight to see my grandmother before she dies. The question is whether you're going to continue this performance or step aside and let a grieving grandson get to his family." The ball was in Victoria's court, but she was quickly running out of room to play. The atmosphere in the Elite Sky VIP lounge had shifted like weather before a storm. What began as Victoria's private power display had evolved into something larger and more dangerous, a public reckoning with attitudes that most people preferred to keep hidden beneath polite surfaces. Amanda Foster's phone was no longer discreetly positioned. She was openly recording now, her lawyer's instincts recognizing a moment that would likely define careers and create legal liability. The video had been streaming live to her Instagram for several minutes, and the comment section was exploding with outrage from viewers around the world. "This is absolutely disgusting," Amanda said, her voice pitched loud enough to carry throughout the lounge. "I'm watching a man being harassed while his grandmother is dying, and for what? Because he doesn't look like what you think money looks like." Other passengers were pulling out their phones now, despite lounge policies prohibiting recording. The Elite Sky discrimination hashtag was already beginning to trend on Twitter, as Amanda's followers shared the stream across multiple platforms. Carlos Mendoza had been watching the confrontation from the boarding gate across the concourse. As a senior pilot with Elite Sky, he had seen enough discrimination complaints to recognize one developing in real time. More importantly, he had seen Marcus Thompson's photo in Corporate Communications Board Meeting Minutes Investor Updates strategic planning documents. Marcus wasn't just any passenger. He was one of Elite Sky's largest private shareholders. Carlos approached the lounge entrance, his pilot's uniform providing access that regular passengers wouldn't have. The 4 gold stripes on his sleeves marked him as a captain with enough seniority to command respect from airport personnel. "Excuse me," Carlos said to Jessica, who was still standing awkwardly between Marcus and Victoria, clearly uncertain about how to de-escalate a situation that was rapidly spinning beyond anyone's control. "I need to speak with Miss Blackwell about a corporate matter." Victoria's head snapped toward Carlos with the expression of someone grasping for any distraction from the hole she had been digging. "Captain, I'm handling a security situation. Can this wait?" "Ma'am," Carlos said carefully, "I strongly recommend you take the call that's been coming through from corporate headquarters. They've been trying to reach you for the past 15 minutes. Victoria's confidence wavered slightly. Her phone had indeed been buzzing with unknown numbers, but she had been too focused on her confrontation with Marcus to answer. "This situation requires immediate attention," she said, though her voice carried less certainty than before. "So does that phone call," Carlos replied. His tone was respectful, but firm, carrying the authority of someone who was accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. "Trust me on this one." Around the lounge, other passengers were becoming increasingly vocal in their support for Marcus. The young man's dignity under pressure and the obvious tragedy of his family situation had created a groundswell of sympathy that was rapidly turning into anger at Victoria's treatment. "This is ridiculous," said an elderly woman in designer clothing, her Chanel handbag probably worth more than most people's monthly salary. "The man's grandmother is dying and you're treating him like a criminal. I've been flying Elite Sky for 20 years, added a business executive in a perfectly tailored suit, and I've never seen such unprofessional behavior from staff. This is embarrassing." Richard Palmer, who had initially supported Victoria's actions, was now looking distinctly uncomfortable as the mood in the lounge shifted against their shared position. He had expected other passengers to rally around the exclusion of someone who didn't fit their elite circle. Instead, he was watching Marcus Thompson's quiet dignity win over hearts and minds, while Victoria's petty tyranny exposed itself for what it was. Perhaps Palmer said carefully we should let the gentleman handle his family emergency and address any administrative questions later. It was too little too late. Palmer's attempt to distance himself from Victoria's actions only highlighted how complicit he had been in the initial discrimination. Amanda's followers were already capturing screenshots of his earlier supportive comments and sharing them with calls for accountability. Brad Morrison arrived from the boarding gate, summoned by Jessica's radio call for additional support. As a gate agent, Brad was accustomed to dealing with difficult passengers, but he immediately sensed that the situation was different. The tension in the room was electric, and the number of phones recording suggested that whatever happened next would be preserved and shared with the world. "What's the situation?" Brad asked, quietly hoping to understand the dynamics before committing to any particular course of action. "Mr. Thompson is using a questionable membership," Victoria explained, though her voice now carried a note of desperation that hadn't been there before. "We're conducting standard verification procedures." Brad looked at the documentation spread across the table. Elite Sky Black Card driver's license credit cards, business cards identifying Marcus as CEO of NextGen Analytics. Nothing about the documentation looked questionable to his experienced eye. Sir Brad said to Marcus, "I apologize for the delay. Can you help me understand what verification you still need to provide?" Marcus's response was calm and devastating. "I've provided every document they've requested. The issue isn't verification, it's discrimination. Miss Blackwell has decided that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly afford a membership that costs 6 figures annually." The word discrimination hung in the air like a spark near gasoline. It named what everyone could see, but many had been reluctant to acknowledge. This wasn't about security or verification, it was about prejudice dressed up as policy. Amanda's live stream had gained thousands of viewers, and the comments were overwhelmingly supportive of Marcus while calling for Victoria's termination. Screenshots of the interaction were being shared across social media platforms, and local news outlets had begun monitoring the hashtag for story development. "Ma'am," Brad said carefully to Victoria, "maybe we should contact corporate and let them handle this situation." Victoria's phone chose that moment to ring with a call from Elite Sky headquarters. The corporate number was clearly displayed on the screen, and everyone in the vicinity could see her hesitate before declining the call. "I'm handling this situation according to established protocols," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. She was beginning to realize that she might have misjudged both the man she was harassing and the situation she had created. Marcus checked his phone again, another urgent message from the hospital. His grandmother was asking for him, specifically wondering why he hadn't arrived yet. The distance between him and the woman who had shaped his life was measured not just in miles, but in the minutes being wasted by someone's need to perform power over those she perceived as powerless. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, addressing the lounge at large, "I want to thank those of you who have spoken up for what's right. This isn't really about me. It's about how we treat people who don't fit our preconceptions, who don't look like what we expect success to look like." His words carried across the space with the authority of someone accustomed to addressing rooms full of powerful people. Several passengers nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable at having their own biases exposed. "I'm going to board my flight now," Marcus continued. "My grandmother doesn't have time for this performance to continue." Marcus gathered his belongings with the same calm deliberation he had shown throughout the confrontation. But as he moved toward the lounge exit, Victoria made the decision that would define the rest of her career. "Security," she called out loudly, "stop that man from leaving. I'm not finished verifying his credentials." The command echoed through the lounge like a gunshot, and the battle lines were finally drawn. Victoria's command to stop Marcus from leaving created a moment of electric silence. Every conversation ceased. Every movement paused as the implications of her words settled over the lounge like a heavy blanket. Jessica Rivera stood frozen between her loyalty to her supervisor and her growing understanding that she was being asked to participate in something fundamentally wrong. The documentation she had examined was clearly legitimate. The man had been nothing but cooperative, and now she was being asked to physically detain someone whose only crime appeared to be flying while black. Miss Blackwell Jessica said carefully, "I don't think I can legally detain someone who hasn't committed a crime." Victoria's facade of professional composure finally cracked completely. Her voice rose to a pitch that carried throughout the adjacent concourse, drawing attention from passengers waiting at nearby gates. "He's using fraudulent documentation to access restricted facilities," Victoria snapped. "That's theft of services and trespassing. I'm authorizing you to detain him until airport police can conduct a proper investigation." The words hung in the air like accusations of treason. Around the lounge, passengers stared in shock at the escalation of what had begun as a routine verification into something that could destroy a man's reputation and freedom. Amanda's live stream exploded with viewer comments calling for immediate action. Screenshots were being shared across Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with growing viral momentum. News outlets were beginning to monitor the situation, and Elite Sky's corporate communications team was frantically trying to understand what was happening in their VIP lounge. Marcus stood perfectly still, his hand on the handle of his carry-on bag, his phone buzzing with another urgent message from his grandmother's hospital. When he looked at Victoria, his expression carried something that made her take an involuntary step backward. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the now silent lounge with perfect clarity, "you have exactly one opportunity to step back from the mistake you're about to make. I suggest you take it." The warning was delivered without anger, without threat, without any emotion except the cold certainty of someone who understood exactly what was happening and what it would cost everyone involved. Victoria had reached the point where retreat felt more dangerous than advance. She had performed her authority, so publicly made such definitive statements about Marcus's legitimacy that backing down would require admitting she had been wrong from the beginning. "I stand by my assessment," Victoria said, her voice shaking slightly but her words carrying the finality of burned bridges. "This man is not who he claims to be, and I won't be intimidated by threats or performances." Carlos Mendoza stepped forward, his pilot's uniform providing authority that cut through the chaos. "Miss Blackwell, I'm ordering you to step back from this situation immediately. You're creating liability for the airline and potentially violating federal regulations regarding passenger harassment." Captain Victoria replied, her voice rising another octave. "I don't take orders from flight crew regarding ground operations. This is my domain, and I'll handle it according to my judgment." Carlos reached for his phone and dialed a number that connected him directly to Elite Sky's operations center. The conversation was brief, urgent, and clearly audible to everyone in the vicinity. "This is Captain Mendoza at Metropolitan Airport," Carlos said. "I need immediate corporate intervention in the VIP lounge. We have a passenger harassment situation that's being live-streamed and creating significant liability for the company." Victoria's phone rang again, corporate headquarters making their third attempt to reach her. This time, the ringing seemed to echo through the lounge like an alarm bell, a warning that was going unheeded. Marcus looked at his watch. His grandmother's condition was deteriorating while he stood in an airport lounge being treated like a criminal by someone who couldn't see past her own prejudices. The time for patience was ending. "You know what," Marcus said quietly, settling back into his chair with the kind of stillness that comes before earthquakes. "I think I'll wait here and see how this plays out. Please continue your investigation." The calmness of his response was more unsettling than anger would have been. Marcus Thompson, worth $500 million, major shareholder in the airline whose employee was harassing him, sat back with the patience of someone who understood that sometimes the most devastating response to discrimination was simply letting discriminators reveal themselves completely. Victoria's phone rang again. This time, Amanda held up her live stream and announced to her thousands of viewers, "Elite Sky Corporate is trying to call their employee who is discriminating against a passenger and she's refusing to answer." The comment section exploded with demands for accountability, calls for boycotts, and increasingly specific threats to Elite Sky's business relationships. The hashtag Elite Sky discrimination was trending nationally now, and traditional media outlets were beginning to pick up the story. Victoria finally answered her phone, but her conversation with corporate was brief and heated. When she hung up, her face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Corporate wants to speak with you directly," Victoria said to Marcus, her voice now carrying none of its earlier confidence. "They're sending someone down to handle this situation." Marcus smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, a cold, knowing expression that seemed to see right through Victoria's facade to the terrified person underneath. "Oh," Marcus said quietly, "I don't think they're coming down here to handle me. I think they're coming down here to handle you." The truth of that statement settled over the lounge like winter fog. Victoria had just discovered that the man she had been harassing wasn't just any passenger. He was someone whose phone calls corporate executives took immediately, someone whose concerns could reshape company policy, someone whose name appeared on documents that determined her employment. The next few minutes would determine whether Victoria's career survived her prejudices. Amanda Foster's live stream had started with 12 followers watching her delayed flight updates. Now, over 50,000 people were witnessing Marcus Thompson's dignity under fire in real time, and the number was climbing exponentially as viewers shared the stream across every social media platform. For those just joining, Amanda narrated to her phone camera, "I'm watching Elite Sky staff harass a passenger whose grandmother is dying, demanding financial records to justify his presence in a lounge he's already paid for access to." This is absolutely incredible. The comment section had become a rapid-fire stream of outrage support for Marcus, and increasingly specific calls for accountability. Viewers were sharing screenshots faster than Amanda could read the responses, and news outlets were beginning to reach out through direct messages for permission to use her footage. Elite Sky discrimination was trending nationwide now, competing with major news events for social media attention. The story had struck a nerve that went beyond airline policies to touch on broader issues of respect, dignity, and the casual cruelty that people in minor positions of authority could inflict on those they perceived as powerless. Victoria's second phone call with corporate had been brief and devastating. Her supervisor's supervisor was personally flying to Metropolitan Airport to assess the situation. The legal department was reviewing potential liability, and the communications team was developing damage control strategies for what was rapidly becoming a public relations nightmare. "Mr. Thompson," Victoria said, her voice now missing its earlier confidence, "corporate has asked me to apologize for any inconvenience while they review our verification procedures." The word apologize fell into the space between them like a stone down a well. Too little, too late, and everyone in the lounge knew it. Marcus had been publicly humiliated, his character questioned, his right to exist in the space challenged, and his family emergency dismissed as irrelevant. "An inconvenience," Marcus repeated quietly. His voice carried just enough emphasis to highlight the inadequacy of Victoria's characterization. "Is that what you call this?" Around the lounge, passengers who had been watching in uncomfortable silence were becoming increasingly vocal in their support for Marcus. The elderly woman with the Chanel handbag had moved to sit near Marcus, a gesture of solidarity that spoke louder than words. The business executive was taking notes on his phone, apparently preparing his own complaint against Victoria's conduct. Richard Palmer had retreated to the far corner of the lounge, suddenly fascinated by his Wall Street Journal and hoping to distance himself from his earlier support for Victoria's actions. But Amanda's followers had already captured screenshots of his comments, and Twitter users were identifying him through corporate databases and LinkedIn profiles. "I think what's happening here is disgusting," said a new voice from the lounge entrance. Dr. Patricia Kim, a surgeon flying to Chicago for a medical conference, had been drawn by the commotion and immediately recognized the dynamics at play. "I've been watching for 5 minutes, and it's clear this man is being targeted because of his race." Dr. Kim's professional authority, she was wearing scrubs with Chicago General Hospital embroidered on the pocket, added weight to the growing chorus of observers who were calling Victoria's behavior what it was: discrimination. "Ma'am," Victoria said desperately, "this is a private matter being handled according to company policy." "Company policy to harass passengers," Dr. Kim shot back. "Company policy to demand financial records from paying customers. Company policy to ignore family medical emergencies." The questions hit Victoria like physical blows. Each one highlighted how far she had strayed from any reasonable interpretation of customer service or security procedures. She was no longer following policy, she was making it up as she went along to justify her initial prejudicial assumptions. Marcus's phone rang and Dr. Williams's name appeared on the caller ID. This time Marcus answered immediately, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion and worry. "Dr. Williams, it's Marcus. How is she?" The conversation was brief but devastating. Eleanor Thompson was conscious but fading. Her heart rhythms were becoming irregular. The medical team was doing everything possible, but they couldn't predict how much time remained. "I'll be there as soon as I can," Marcus said before ending the call. When he looked up, his eyes held something that made everyone in the lounge, even Victoria, take notice. "My grandmother has maybe hours left to live," Marcus announced to the room. "She's the woman who raised me, who worked 3 jobs to put me through college, who taught me that dignity isn't something you can buy or someone can take away." His voice carried across the space with perfect clarity, reaching passengers at nearby gates who had been drawn by the growing commotion. Right now, she's lying in a hospital bed wondering why her grandson hasn't come to see her. And I'm sitting in an airport lounge being treated like a criminal by someone who can't see past my appearance to recognize my humanity. The words landed like hammer blows. Several passengers were openly crying now, moved by the combination of Marcus's dignity and Victoria's cruelty. Amanda's live stream was being shared by celebrities, politicians, and news outlets as an example of discrimination in action. Jessica Rivera finally made the decision that her conscience had been demanding. She stepped between Victoria and Marcus, her hand moving away from her radio to signal her withdrawal from enforcement. "Ma'am?" Jessica said to Victoria, "I can't be part of this anymore. There's no legal justification for detaining this passenger, and continuing to harass him could create civil rights violations that go beyond company policy." Victoria's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Her carefully constructed authority was crumbling in front of an audience of passengers, colleagues, and most dangerously thousands of social media witnesses who were capturing every moment of her professional destruction. "You're all being manipulated," Victoria said, her voice rising to near hysteria. "This man is not who he claims to be. He's using sophisticated fraud to access facilities he hasn't paid for." The accusation was so clearly desperate that it prompted actual laughter from some observers. Marcus's documentation was spread across the side table for everyone to examine: Elite Sky Black Card, valid driver's license, credit cards, business identification. Nothing about any of it suggested fraud, except Victoria's refusal to accept that someone who looked like Marcus could legitimately possess such credentials. Carlos Mendoza's radio crackled with a message from Elite Sky Operations. The conversation was brief, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear key phrases: corporate intervention, passenger rights violation, immediate assessment. Miss Blackwell, Carlos said after ending his radio conversation, "I've been instructed to inform you that Elite Sky's executive team is en route to handle this situation personally. They've asked that no further action be taken until they arrive." The word personally carried weight that everyone in the lounge understood. When airline executives traveled personally to handle situations, careers ended and policies changed. Victoria had created a crisis that reached the highest levels of corporate leadership. Marcus stood slowly gathering his belongings with the same careful deliberation he had shown throughout the confrontation. But this time his movement carried different energy, not the patience of someone being victimized, but the controlled purpose of someone preparing to act. "You know what Victoria," Marcus said, using her first name for the first time with an intimacy that somehow made the moment more personal and more threatening. "I think I'll wait for your executives to arrive. This conversation is just getting interesting. Amanda's followers were now approaching 100,000, and the hashtag Elite Sky Discrimination was trending internationally. Screenshots of the interaction were being shared by verified accounts with millions of followers, and traditional news outlets were preparing breaking news alerts. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message that she read with growing horror. It was from her regional supervisor: "Do not take any further action regarding Mr. Thompson. Await executive arrival. Your employment status is under immediate review." The message was clear enough that Victoria's hands began to shake. She had pursued her discrimination so publicly, so thoroughly documented by social media, that retreat was no longer possible, and advance had become professionally suicidal. Marcus settled back into his chair and pulled out his laptop, a simple professional model that could have belonged to any business traveler. He opened it calmly and began typing, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "What are you doing?" Victoria asked, her voice now carrying notes of panic that she couldn't quite suppress. Marcus looked up with an expression of mild surprise, as if the question itself revealed how little Victoria understood about the situation she had created. "I'm sending an email," Marcus said simply, "to some friends who might be interested in how Elite Sky treats their customers." The casual nature of his response was more terrifying than any threat could have been. Marcus Thompson wasn't just any passenger. He was someone whose friends included people who could reshape entire industries with strategic decisions about business partnerships, investment portfolios, and public recommendations. Victoria had spent her career building what she thought was power. Now she was about to discover the difference between authority and influence, between position and actual capability. The real education was just beginning. Richard Palmer had been retreating from the confrontation for several minutes, hoping to distance himself from Victoria's increasingly obvious discrimination. But as the lounge filled with tension and social media attention, he found himself trapped between his earlier supportive comments and the growing recognition that he had chosen the wrong side. Amanda's followers had identified Palmer through corporate records. He was senior vice president of Legacy Holdings, a private equity firm that managed portfolios for wealthy families. His LinkedIn profile, complete with connections to country club boards and exclusive investment groups, was being shared alongside screenshots of his discriminatory comments. Mr. Palmer, Amanda called out her phone camera, trained on him with the focus of a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Earlier, you said it was a fair question to demand this gentleman's financial records. Do you still stand by that statement?" Palmer's face flushed red as he realized his comments had been broadcast to thousands of viewers and preserved in digital perpetuity. His professional reputation, built over decades of careful networking and strategic relationship building, was being destroyed by his casual endorsement of discrimination. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Palmer began, but Amanda cut him off with the precision of someone who understood how viral moments worked. "No misunderstanding," Amanda replied. "You very clearly stated that questioning this gentleman's right to be here was fair. You supported demanding his financial documentation to justify his presence. That's on record." The comment section of Amanda's livestream exploded with viewers calling for Palmer's employer to be contacted, his clients to be informed, and his professional associations to be notified about his publicly expressed views on who deserved respect based on appearance. Brad Morrison, who had arrived as backup security, found himself caught between competing loyalties and growing awareness that he was witnessing career-defining moments for everyone involved. As a gate agent, he had received sensitivity training about passenger rights and discrimination policies. What he was watching violated every principle he had been taught. Miss Blackwell Brad said carefully, "I think we should wait for corporate before taking any further action." This situation has become complicated. Victoria's desperation was becoming more apparent with each passing minute. Her authority was evaporating in real time, documented by social media, and witnessed by a growing audience of passengers who had been drawn by the commotion. "Complicated," Victoria snapped. "What's complicated about verifying credentials and maintaining security standards?" Dr. Kim stepped forward again, her medical authority providing weight to her observations. "What's complicated is watching airport personnel harass a passenger while his grandmother is dying." What's complicated is the obvious racial discrimination being live-streamed to thousands of people. The word racial hung in the air like a challenge. Until now, most observers had been thinking it without saying it directly. Doctor. Kim's willingness to name what everyone could see forced the issue into the open where it could no longer be ignored or rationalized. This has nothing to do with race, Victoria protested, but her voice carried the hollow ring of someone even she didn't believe. This is about security protocols and proper verification procedures. Security protocols that only seem to apply to black passengers, Dr. Kim shot back. Verification procedures that demand financial documentation from people who have already proven their legitimate access. A new voice joined the growing chorus of opposition. Michael Rodriguez, a corporate lawyer flying to a merger negotiation in Chicago, had been watching the confrontation while working on his laptop. As someone who specialized in discrimination cases, he recognized liability when he saw it. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said to Victoria, his voice carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to courtrooms, "what you're doing right now is creating textbook civil rights violations. You've singled out one passenger for treatment that you clearly don't apply to others. You've demanded documentation that exceeds any reasonable security requirement, and you've ignored his legitimate family emergency." Victoria's last allies were abandoning her one by one as the legal and professional implications became clear. Even Palmer was now sitting in silence, checking his own phone to see if his employer had been contacted about his involvement in the viral discrimination incident. Marcus continued typing on his laptop, occasionally glancing at his phone to check messages from the hospital. His grandmother's condition remained critical but stable for the moment. Every minute he spent in this airport lounge was a minute he might never get back, but he had made a strategic decision to see this confrontation through to its conclusion. Mr. Thompson called a new voice from the lounge entrance. Sarah Mitchell, Elite Sky's Regional Customer Service Director, had arrived with a small team of corporate representatives. Her expression was grim as she surveyed the scene passengers filming social media attention, clear evidence of discrimination being broadcast to the world. Miss Mitchell Marcus said, standing to greet her with the courtesy that had marked his behavior throughout the confrontation. "I'm glad you could make it." Sarah had been briefed during her rapid trip to the airport. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a passenger, he was a major shareholder whose investment portfolio included significant holdings in Elite Sky's parent company. His business relationships extended throughout the airline industry, and his personal network included executives who could influence billions of dollars in corporate partnerships. Mr. Thompson, Sarah said, "I want to personally apologize for this situation and assure you that it doesn't represent Elite Sky's values or policies." Victoria's face went white as she realized that corporate leadership was apologizing to Marcus rather than supporting her actions. The power dynamic she had tried to establish was not just reversed, it was obliterated. "I was just following security protocols," Victoria said desperately. This passenger's documentation raised red flags that required additional verification. Sarah's expression hardened as she looked at the documentation spread across the side table. Legitimate membership cards, valid identification, business credentials that clearly established Marcus's identity and status. "What red flags?" Sarah asked. "I see valid Elite Sky membership, proper identification, and legitimate business credentials. What specifically raised security concerns?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Victoria had no legitimate answer because there had been no legitimate security concerns, only prejudicial assumptions based on Marcus's appearance. "He didn't look like someone who could afford such expensive memberships," Palmer said suddenly, apparently deciding that honesty might provide some escape from his complicity in the discrimination. The admission was so breathtakingly honest about the prejudice motivating the harassment that several passengers actually gasped. Palmer had just confessed to discrimination based solely on racial profiling, and he had done it while being recorded for social media distribution. Sarah turned to Palmer with an expression that could have frozen fire. "Sir, are you admitting that you supported harassment based on assumptions about someone's appearance and race?" Palmer realized too late that his attempt at honesty had become a legal confession. Corporate lawyers would be reviewing his statement within hours, and his employer would be facing questions about their executives' publicly expressed discriminatory views. Marcus closed his laptop with quiet finality. The email he had been composing was complete a detailed account of the incident sent to board members, industry contacts, and civil rights organizations. The story would reach decision-makers and influencers throughout the business community within hours. Sarah Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue, "I think it's time we had a more private conversation about how Elite Sky handles passenger relations." The words were polite, but everyone in the lounge understood their implications. Marcus Thompson was moving from victim to authority figure, from harassed passenger to major stakeholder, from someone seeking service to someone who could reshape the company providing it. Victoria's career had just ended, though she didn't realize it yet. Palmer's professional reputation was in ruins, documented and distributed across social media platforms. The other antagonists were scrambling to distance themselves from a situation that would define how discrimination was confronted in the digital age. The real consequences were just beginning. Sarah Mitchell's arrival with the Elite Sky corporate team transformed the atmosphere in the VIP lounge from chaotic confrontation to damage assessment crisis management. The three executives accompanying her, legal director James Walsh, communications manager Lisa Park, and operations vice president David Chang, moved with the urgent efficiency of people handling a situation that could reshape their company's reputation. Amanda's live stream had reached nearly 200,000 viewers, and the hashtag Elite Sky Discrimination was trending globally now. News outlets were preparing breaking news segments. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements, and Elite Sky's stock price was beginning to fluctuate as investors assessed the potential impact of viral discrimination footage. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone walking through a minefield. "Perhaps we could discuss this situation in a more private setting." Marcus glanced around the lounge at Victoria, whose face had gone pale with the recognition of her mistake. At Palmer, who was frantically checking his phone for messages from his employer. At the dozens of passengers who were still filming and photographing the unfolding corporate response. "I think we've moved beyond private discussions," Marcus replied quietly. "This situation has been public from the beginning, documented in detail and witnessed by thousands of people. I see no reason to hide the resolution." The statement was delivered with such calm authority that Sarah immediately understood she wasn't dealing with a typical passenger complaint. Marcus Thompson wasn't seeking private compensation or quiet resolution. He was conducting a public education about discrimination and institutional failure. James Walsh, the legal director, stepped forward with the nervous energy of someone calculating massive potential liability. "Mr. Thompson, Elite Sky takes discrimination allegations very seriously. We have comprehensive policies and training programs designed to prevent exactly this type of incident." Marcus's smile was cold enough to lower the temperature in the room. "Then your policies and training programs have failed spectacularly, haven't they?" The observation hung in the air like an indictment. Walsh realized that any defense of company policies would only highlight how completely those policies had been ignored or subverted by Victoria's actions. Dr. Kim, who had been watching the corporate response with professional interest, stepped forward again. "I'd like to understand how a passenger with valid documentation and legitimate access was subjected to harassment while dealing with a family medical emergency." Her question was directed at Sarah, but it carried implications that extended throughout Elite Sky's corporate structure. If discrimination could happen this openly in a premium facility, what was occurring in less visible parts of the airline's operations? "Our preliminary investigation suggests that Miss Blackwell exceeded her authority and violated company policies," Sarah replied carefully. "We're conducting a comprehensive review of the incident and will take appropriate corrective action." Victoria's mouth fell open as she realized her employer was distancing themselves from her actions rather than supporting them. "I was following established protocols for suspicious behavior," she protested. "What suspicious behavior?" Walsh asked sharply. His legal training made him recognize that Victoria's answer would either provide legitimate justification or create additional liability for the company. Victoria looked around the room, desperately searching for support that was no longer there. Palmer avoided eye contact. Brad Morrison had backed away towards the exit, and Jessica Rivera was standing as far from Victoria as possible while remaining in the lounge. He was dressed inappropriately for the lounge's standards, Victoria said finally. His behavior seemed evasive, and his documentation raised questions about authenticity. Each word was documented by multiple cameras and broadcast to hundreds of thousands of viewers who could see Marcus's professional appearance, dignified behavior, and legitimate documentation spread across the side table. Lisa Park, the communications manager, was simultaneously taking notes and monitoring social media reaction on her phone. The company's official Twitter account was being flooded with demands for accountability, threats of boycotts, and calls for transparency about Elite Sky's discrimination policies. Mr. Thompson Park said, "We understand you have significant influence in the business community. Is there anything Elite Sky can do to address your concerns and resolve this situation constructively?" The question revealed how thoroughly the power dynamic had shifted. Park was treating Marcus as a peer rather than a customer, acknowledging his ability to influence the airline's business relationships and public reputation. Marcus checked his phone again, another update from the hospital. His grandmother was stable, but asking for him specifically. Every moment spent in this airport lounge was time stolen from what might be their final conversation. "What you can do," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the now silent lounge, "is acknowledge that this incident represents broader problems in how your company treats passengers who don't fit narrow expectations about what success looks like." David Chang, the operations vice president, nodded slowly. "We're prepared to conduct a comprehensive review of our customer service protocols and bias prevention training," Good Marcus replied. "But don't stop there. This incident was witnessed and documented by dozens of people who recognized discrimination when they saw it. The question is whether Elite Sky will use this moment to create real change or just better public relations." Carlos Mendoza, who had been observing the corporate response from the edge of the group, stepped forward with the authority of someone who understood airline operations from the inside. "Mr. Thompson raises important points about institutional culture," Carlos said. "As a senior pilot, I can tell you that discrimination complaints are often minimized or buried rather than addressed substantively." His statement sent shockwaves through the corporate team. Carlos was confirming that the problems revealed by Victoria's behavior extended throughout Elite Sky's operations, that this wasn't an isolated incident, but a symptom of deeper cultural issues. Walsh immediately recognized the legal implications of Carlos's statement. If discrimination complaints had been routinely suppressed or mishandled, Elite Sky faced potential class action liability that could reach hundreds of millions of dollars. Captain Mendoza Walsh said carefully, "Perhaps we should discuss your observations in a more formal setting where we can properly document and investigate your concerns." "Document and investigate?" Dr. Kim laughed harshly. "We're watching discrimination happen live on social media, and you're talking about documentation. The documentation is right here being broadcast to the world." Her frustration reflected the feelings of many observers who had watched Marcus maintain dignity while being repeatedly humiliated by someone whose only authority came from her position rather than her character. Marcus stood and gathered his belongings again, his movement commanding attention from everyone in the lounge. "I'm going to catch my flight to see my grandmother now," he announced. "But this conversation isn't over." He looked directly at Victoria, his expression containing something between pity and disappointment. "Miss Blackwell, you made assumptions about me based on my appearance, and those assumptions revealed more about your character than mine. I hope you learned something from this experience." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as the full weight of her mistake became clear. She wasn't just facing professional consequences, she was confronting the reality that her prejudices had caused real harm to someone dealing with a genuine family tragedy. Victoria began, but Marcus held up one hand. "Apologies are meaningful when they lead to change," Marcus said quietly. I'll judge your sincerity by whether Elite Sky uses this moment to become better or just to limit liability. Sarah stepped forward again, her voice carrying genuine emotion rather than corporate calculation. Mr. Thompson, you have my personal commitment that this incident will lead to substantial changes in how Elite Sky operates. Marcus studied her face for a moment, assessing whether her words carried authentic intent or empty promise. I'll be watching, he said simply. As Marcus moved toward the boarding gate, Amanda called out from behind her camera. Mr. Thompson, do you have any final words for the people who've been watching this incident? Marcus paused at the lounge entrance, his silhouette framed against the bustling concourse beyond. When he spoke, his voice carried across the space and through social media to hundreds of thousands of people around the world. Dignity isn't something you earn through success or lose through prejudice, Marcus said. It's something every person possesses from birth and deserves to keep until death. Today, you watched someone try to take that away from me, and you watched me refuse to let them succeed. He looked back at Victoria one final time. The question for everyone watching is this: when you see discrimination happening, will you be a bystander, or will you be someone who speaks up for what's right? The challenge hung in the air as Marcus walked toward his gate, leaving behind a lounge full of people who would never forget what they had witnessed, and never again be able to claim they didn't recognize discrimination when they saw it. Sarah Mitchell's second phone call with CEO Robert Harrison lasted less than 30 seconds, but its implications reverberated through Elite Sky's corporate structure like seismic waves. The conversation was audible to everyone within 10 feet, despite Sarah's attempts to speak quietly. Blackwell is terminated immediately. Harrison's voice carried through the phone speaker. Palmer is banned permanently from all Elite Sky properties. I want a complete review of discrimination complaints dating back 5 years, and I want Thompson treated like the major shareholder he is. The final sentence dropped into the lounge like a bombshell. Victoria's face went white as she realized she hadn't just harassed any passenger, she had dealt with discrimination against someone who owned a significant portion of the company that employed her. Major shareholder Amanda repeated to her livestream audience, now approaching 500,000 viewers. This man owns part of the airline whose employee was discriminating against him. This just became even more incredible. The revelation exploded across social media as viewers shared screenshots and commentary about the irony of Elite Sky employees harassing someone who helped determine their employment. The story evolved from passenger discrimination to corporate governance failure in real time. Victoria sank into a nearby chair as the full magnitude of her mistake became clear. She hadn't just violated company policy or created bad publicity, she had repeatedly harassed someone whose investment decisions could reshape the entire airline industry. Palmer's phone rang again, this time with a call from his largest client, the Henderson Family Trust, which managed over $2 billion in assets. The conversation was brief and devastating. Richard came the voice of Margaret Henderson, whose family fortune dated back 4 generations. We've seen the video of your comments supporting racial discrimination. The trust is terminating its relationship with Legacy Holdings immediately. Palmer's professional destruction was happening in real time, documented for social media, and witnessed by dozens of people who understood they were watching consequences unfold for publicly expressed prejudice. James Walsh realized that Elite Sky's legal strategy had shifted from damage control to crisis management. With Marcus revealed as a major shareholder, the company faced potential derivative lawsuits, SEC investigations, and board governance challenges that could reach the highest levels of corporate leadership. Mr. Thompson Walsh called toward the boarding gate where Marcus was waiting for his flight. Could we speak privately about resolving this situation? Marcus looked back toward the lounge, his expression carrying the kind of calm authority that comes with understanding exactly how much power you hold and how to use it effectively. There's nothing private about discrimination, Marcus replied, his voice carrying across the concourse loud enough for Amanda's live stream to capture clearly. This situation will be resolved publicly, transparently, and with accountability for everyone involved. Lisa Park was monitoring social media metrics that painted a devastating picture for Elite Sky's reputation. The hashtag Elite Sky discrimination was trending in 12 countries. The airline's stock price had dropped 4% in after-hours trading, and competitor airlines were already crafting marketing messages about their superior customer service. "We need immediate action," Park told Sarah urgently. "Traditional crisis management won't work when the story is still being written in real time." Carlos Mendoza approached the corporate team with additional information that would complicate their response even further. As a senior pilot with 20 years of experience at Elite Sky, he had witnessed patterns of discrimination that extended throughout the company's operations. "Miss Mitchell Carlos said you need to understand that this incident isn't isolated. I've seen passengers of color questioned, delayed, and humiliated in ways that white passengers never experience. Victoria's behavior today is consistent with a culture that needs fundamental change." His statement was captured by multiple phone cameras and immediately shared across social media platforms. Carlos wasn't just describing individual misconduct, he was exposing cultural problems that enabled recurring discrimination throughout Elite Sky's operations. Dr. Kim stepped forward to support Carlos's observations. "As someone who travels frequently for medical conferences, I can confirm that I've witnessed similar incidents at airports across the country. This appears to be an industry-wide problem that requires industry-wide solutions." Her professional credibility added weight to allegations that Elite Sky faced institutional rather than individual liability. If discrimination was embedded in company culture, leadership faced accountability that extended far beyond Victoria's misconduct. Victoria's union representative finally arrived, a tired-looking man in his 50s, who immediately assessed the situation and recognized that his client faced termination for cause rather than disciplinary action that could be grieved or appealed. Miss Blackwell, the representative, said quietly, "Based on what I'm seeing here, your best option is to cooperate fully with the investigation and hope for a neutral reference." Victoria's professional career was over, but the broader implications of her actions were just beginning. The viral video had sparked conversations about discrimination in travel, the performance of authority by people in minor positions, and the difference between power and character. Marcus's phone buzzed with another call, this time from David Chen, Elite Sky's chairman of the board, and someone Marcus had known for several years through various business relationships. Marcus Chen said, his voice carrying the weight of someone calling to address a crisis that threatened the company's fundamental reputation. "I've been briefing board members about today's incident. We want to meet with you personally to discuss comprehensive changes to prevent future discrimination." The offer represented exactly what Marcus had been working toward. Not just individual accountability, but institutional transformation that would protect future passengers from the treatment he had experienced. David Marcus replied, "I appreciate the call, but any conversation about changes needs to happen publicly and transparently. The people who witnessed this incident deserve to see how it's resolved." Chen understood immediately that traditional corporate responses, private meetings, confidential settlements, quiet policy adjustments wouldn't satisfy public demand for accountability in the social media age. Sarah approached Marcus directly, her expression carrying genuine emotion rather than corporate calculation. "Mr. Thompson speaking personally rather than professionally. I want you to know that what happened today was wrong, and it doesn't represent the values that most Elite Sky employees try to uphold." Marcus studied her face, assessing whether her words carried authentic intent or strategic positioning. "Sarah, I believe you're sincere, but intention without action is just rhetoric. The question is whether Elite Sky will use this moment to create real change or just better public relations." Amanda's livestream audience had grown to nearly 600,000 viewers, and the story was being covered by major news outlets as an example of viral accountability in action. The incident had transcended airline customer service to become a case study in how discrimination was confronted and addressed in the digital age. For those still watching, Amanda narrated to her camera, "We're witnessing something remarkable here. A passenger who is discriminated against has been revealed as a major shareholder in the company that discriminated against him. The power dynamics have completely reversed, and we're seeing real-time accountability for prejudice and bias. The observation captured what made this story compelling to hundreds of thousands of viewers. It wasn't just about individual injustice, but about how power structures could be challenged and changed when discrimination was exposed to public scrutiny. Victoria stood slowly gathering her belongings with the mechanical movements of someone whose professional life had just ended in the most public way possible. Her discrimination hadn't just cost her a job, it had sparked a national conversation about bias, respect, and human dignity, Miss Blackwell, Dr. Kim said, as Victoria moved toward the exit. I hope you learned something important today about the difference between authority and character. Victoria paused at the lounge entrance, her shoulders shaking with emotion that might have been regret, shame, or simple recognition of the magnitude of her mistake. Victoria began, then stopped. There were no words that could undo what she had done, no apology that could restore the dignity she had tried to take from someone whose only offense was not conforming to her narrow expectations about success. Victoria left the lounge in silence, escorted by corporate security toward termination procedures that would end her 15-year career at Elite Sky. Behind her, she left a space filled with people who would never forget what they had witnessed. Discrimination exposed, challenged, and defeated through the simple power of refusing to accept injustice. Marcus finally boarded his flight to Chicago, his departure marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The confrontation in the VIP lounge had revealed more than just individual prejudice. It had exposed institutional failures that would require fundamental change. The plane lifted off toward Chicago, carrying Marcus toward his grandmother's bedside and away from an airport where the conversation about dignity, respect, and human worth would continue long after his departure. But the real work of transformation was just beginning. The Elite Sky flight to Chicago passed quickly for Marcus, though his mind remained focused on the hospital where his grandmother waited. The flight crew alerted to his shareholder status, and the viral incident at Metropolitan Airport treated him with exceptional courtesy that felt both genuine and strategic. Captain Rodriguez personally visited Marcus during the flight to apologize for what had happened, and to assure him that Elite Sky's pilot corps supported comprehensive changes to prevent future discrimination. The gesture was captured by other passengers and shared on social media, creating additional pressure for company-wide accountability. When the plane landed at O'Hare, Marcus was met at the gate by Elena Santos, Elite Sky's Vice President of Customer Relations, who had flown to Chicago specifically to address his concerns and coordinate the company's response to the ongoing viral crisis. Mr. Thompson, Elena said, I want to personally ensure your transportation to the hospital is handled smoothly, and I hope we can schedule time to discuss how Elite Sky can address the failures you experienced today. Marcus appreciated the gesture, but his priority remained getting to his grandmother's bedside. Eleanor Thompson was conscious but weak when he arrived at Chicago General, her aged hand gripping his with surprising strength as he told her about the day's events. Baby Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with the pride that had sustained their family through decades of challenges, you handled yourself just like your grandfather would have. Never let anyone make you small, but don't make yourself big by making others small. Her words carried the wisdom of someone who had faced discrimination throughout her life but had taught her grandson to respond with dignity rather than revenge. Marcus held her hand as she slipped back into peaceful sleep, grateful for the chance to be present during what might be their final conversation. Meanwhile, the consequences of the Metropolitan Airport incident continued unfolding in real time. Amanda's live stream had reached over 1 million viewers, and the story was being covered by every major news outlet as an example of viral accountability for discrimination. Victoria Blackwell's termination was officially announced by Elite Sky within hours of the incident, along with a company statement acknowledging that her behavior violated fundamental policies and values. The statement included specific commitments to bias training, discrimination reporting, and cultural transformation. Richard Palmer faced more severe consequences. Legacy Holdings terminated his employment and announced an internal review of client relationships and investment strategies. several major clients withdrew their portfolios based on Palmer's publicly expressed support for racial profiling, creating financial consequences that extended far beyond individual embarrassment. Brad Morrison received formal disciplinary action but kept his position after demonstrating genuine remorse and commitment to sensitivity training. Jessica Rivera was reassigned to duties that didn't involve passenger interactions while she completed comprehensive bias prevention education. The broader implications extended throughout Elite Sky's corporate structure. CEO Robert Harrison announced the formation of an independent task force to review discrimination complaints, passenger treatment protocols, and employee training programs. The task force would include civil rights organizations, passenger advocates, and community representatives. Marcus returned to the hospital each day while monitoring Elite Sky's response to the viral incident. His business associates and investment partners were calling regularly to discuss potential consequences for their airline industry relationships, creating pressure that extended far beyond individual customer service failures. On the third day, David Chen, Elite Sky's chairman, requested a personal meeting at the hospital. The gesture, a board chairman traveling to meet with a passenger who had been discriminated against, demonstrated the seriousness with which corporate leadership was treating the incident. Marcus Chen said as they met in the hospital's family conference room, "I want to discuss specific changes that go beyond public relations to address the cultural problems your experience revealed." Marcus had been waiting for this conversation, the opportunity to transform his personal experience of discrimination into institutional change that would protect future passengers from similar treatment. David Marcus replied, "I'm interested in results, not promises. The question is whether Elite Sky will implement changes that prevent discrimination or just changes that limit liability." Chen presented a comprehensive proposal that had been developed by corporate leadership, legal counsel, and outside consultants, the Thompson Protocol, a framework for passenger relations that would eliminate subjective judgments based on appearance income assumptions or racial profiling. The protocol included specific elements: mandatory bias prevention training for all customer-facing employees, independent oversight of discrimination complaints, regular audits of passenger treatment patterns, and financial penalties for managers who failed to address discriminatory behavior. "This isn't just policy adjustment," Chen explained. "This is fundamental cultural transformation designed to ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Marcus reviewed the proposal carefully, recognizing both its potential impact and the accountability mechanisms that would ensure implementation. The Thompson Protocol represented exactly what he had hoped to achieve: change that addressed root causes rather than individual symptoms. "I'll support this initiative," Marcus said, "with two conditions. First, implementation must be transparent and subject to independent monitoring. Second, the protocol must be shared with other airlines as an industry standard rather than competitive advantage." Chen agreed immediately, understanding that Marcus's support would provide credibility and legitimacy for changes that might otherwise be viewed as reactive public relations. Eleanor Thompson's condition improved dramatically over the following days. Her recovery, attributed by doctors to the combination of medical treatment and the emotional boost of having her grandson present during her health crisis. Marcus spent hours at her bedside sharing stories about his business success and the discrimination incident that had sparked national conversations about respect and dignity. "You know what makes me proudest?" Eleanor told him as her strength returned. "Not that you're rich or successful, but that you used this terrible situation to help other people who might face the same treatment." Her words captured what Marcus had been trying to accomplish, transforming personal injustice into broader social progress, using his privilege and platform to create change that would benefit people who didn't have his resources or influence. When Marcus finally returned to his business responsibilities, he carried with him a renewed understanding of his role as someone whose success created obligations to address inequality and injustice wherever he encountered them. The viral video of his discrimination had sparked conversations in corporate boardrooms, airport lounges, and family dinner tables about the casual cruelty that people in minor positions of authority could inflict on those they perceived as different or unworthy. But the story wasn't ending with individual accountability. It was beginning a larger transformation in how the travel industry approached passenger relations and human dignity. 6 months after the Metropolitan Airport incident, the Thompson Protocol had been implemented across Elite Sky's entire domestic network, creating the most comprehensive anti-discrimination framework in airline industry history. The changes extended far beyond policy adjustments to include cultural transformation that affected every aspect of passenger relations. Marcus served on the independent oversight board that monitored implementation, working alongside civil rights leaders, passenger advocates, and former airline employees who brought diverse perspectives to the challenge of creating institutional change. The protocol's impact was immediately measurable. Discrimination complaints dropped by 78% in the first 6 months. Passenger satisfaction scores reached all-time highs, and employee surveys showed increased confidence in handling diverse customer interactions without bias or prejudice. Dr. Patricia Kim, who had witnessed the original incident, was invited to serve on Elite Sky's Medical Advisory Committee, bringing healthcare perspective to passenger assistance policies for travelers dealing with family emergencies or medical crises. Carlos Mendoza was promoted to Director of Pilot Relations and Passenger Advocacy, a newly created position that gave him authority to address discrimination complaints and cultural issues throughout Elite Sky's flight operations. His first initiative was mandatory bias prevention training for all cockpit crews. Amanda Foster's viral livestream had been viewed over 50 million times, becoming a case study in digital activism and viral accountability. She was invited to speak at social media conferences and civil rights events about the power of citizen journalism to expose and address institutional discrimination. The broader airline industry took notice as competitors faced pressure to match Elite Sky's commitment to passenger dignity. Delta Airlines announced similar bias prevention initiatives. American Airlines created passenger advocacy positions, and industry associations developed shared standards for respectful customer treatment. Marcus's business influence extended the impact beyond Elite Sky to affect airline partnerships, investment decisions, and corporate relationships throughout the travel industry. Companies that demonstrated commitment to equality and respect received preferential treatment in his investment portfolio. The Thompson Protocol became a template for other industries facing discrimination challenges. Hotels, restaurants, retail companies, and financial institutions adapted its principles to create their own frameworks for bias prevention and cultural transformation. Eleanor Thompson recovered fully from her health crisis and became an advocate for dignity in healthcare settings, working with hospital administrators to ensure that patients and families received respectful treatment regardless of their appearance, insurance status, or social background. Victoria Blackwell faced ongoing consequences for her discriminatory behavior. Her termination from Elite Sky was upheld through union grievance procedures, and her professional reputation made it difficult to find comparable employment in the hospitality industry. She eventually entered counseling and bias prevention training, acknowledging the need to address attitudes that had shaped her interactions with people she perceived as different. Richard Palmer's career in financial services ended permanently. Legacy Holdings faced client lawsuits and regulatory investigation based on his public expression of discriminatory views, creating financial consequences that reached into millions of dollars in lost business and legal settlements. The legal implications extended beyond individual accountability to include institutional liability. Elite Sky faced class action lawsuits from passengers who had experienced similar discrimination, resulting in settlements that funded bias prevention programs and passenger advocacy initiatives. Marcus used his platform to address business conferences and university audiences about the intersection of corporate success and social responsibility. His message was consistent: businesses that failed to address discrimination and bias faced not just moral failure, but strategic vulnerability in an increasingly connected and socially conscious marketplace. "What happened to me at Metropolitan Airport wasn't unusual," Marcus told a Harvard Business School audience. What was unusual was having it documented and shared with millions of people in real time. Most discrimination happens in private, without witnesses to people who don't have resources to fight back. His speeches consistently emphasized that the Thompson Protocol represented just the beginning of necessary changes to create truly inclusive business environments, where success was measured by character and competence rather than appearance and assumptions. The protocol's success attracted international attention from civil rights organizations, government agencies, and multinational corporations, seeking to address discrimination in their own operations. Marcus received invitations to speak at conferences in London, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo about translating viral accountability into institutional transformation. Elite Sky's stock price recovered and exceeded previous highs as investors recognized that the company's commitment to passenger dignity created competitive advantages in customer loyalty and employee satisfaction. The incident that could have destroyed the airline's reputation instead became the foundation for industry leadership in equality and respect. The broader cultural impact extended beyond business to affect social conversations about bias privilege and the responsibility to speak up when witnessing injustice. Amanda's decision to live stream the discrimination incident inspired similar documentation of bias in retail stores, restaurants, and public spaces. Marcus established the Eleanor Thompson Foundation for Dignity in Travel funding programs that provided legal advocacy for passengers facing discrimination and supporting bias prevention training for transportation industry employees. The foundation's work ensured that the lessons from Metropolitan Airport would continue protecting travelers for years to come. The transformation sparked by a single incident of discrimination had created ripple effects that reached throughout American business culture, demonstrating the power of viral accountability to drive institutional change when combined with strategic leadership and sustained commitment to justice. 2 years after the incident at Metropolitan Airport, Marcus Thompson stood before an audience of 2,000 travel industry executives at the Global Aviation Summit in Geneva. The man who had been humiliated for wearing jeans in an airport lounge was now the keynote speaker at the industry's most prestigious conference. Dignity, Marcus told the assembled leaders, isn't a perk for first-class passengers or a privilege for people who look successful. It's the birthright of every human being who walks through your doors regardless of what they're wearing or what assumptions you make about their bank account. Eleanor Thompson, now 86 and recovering fully from her health crisis, watched the speech via live stream from her Chicago apartment. She had lived to see her grandson transform personal injustice into global change, using his success to protect others who might face similar discrimination. The Thompson Protocol had been adopted by airlines in 43 countries, creating international standards for passenger dignity that extended far beyond the aviation industry. Hotels, restaurants, and retail companies had implemented similar frameworks, acknowledging that bias prevention was both moral imperative and business necessity. Victoria Blackwell had spent the 2 years since her termination in counseling community service and bias prevention training. She now worked for a nonprofit organization that provided sensitivity education to hospitality industry employees, using her experience as an example of how prejudice could destroy careers and damage lives. I thought I was protecting standards, Victoria told groups of airport and airline employees during training sessions. But I was really protecting my own narrow view of what success looked like. Mr. Thompson taught me that respect isn't earned through appearance, it's given because someone is human. Richard Palmer never recovered professionally from his public support of discrimination. His financial planning practice failed, his social connections dissolved, and his family faced ongoing consequences from his viral expression of prejudice. He eventually moved to another state, working in accounting while dealing with the permanent damage to his reputation. The legal settlements from discrimination lawsuits had funded passenger advocacy programs at airports across America. Trained advocates now worked in major terminals to assist travelers facing bias harassment or unfair treatment, ensuring that discrimination would be documented, addressed, and prevented. Amanda Foster had parlayed her viral live stream into a career in digital civil rights advocacy. Her documentation of the Marcus Thompson incident became a template for citizen journalism that exposed bias in corporate settings, inspiring similar accountability across numerous industries. Carlos Mendoza had been promoted to Vice President of Equality and Inclusion at Elite Sky, overseeing programs that had eliminated discrimination complaints while improving employee satisfaction and customer loyalty. His work became a model for addressing institutional bias in transportation companies worldwide. Marcus's business success had continued growing, but his focus had shifted to investments that promoted equality, dignity, and social justice. His portfolio included companies committed to bias prevention, diverse hiring, and inclusive corporate cultures that measured success by character as well as profit. The Eleanor Thompson Foundation had provided legal assistance to over 3,000 travelers facing discrimination-funded bias prevention training for 50,000 transportation employees and established scholarship programs for students committed to civil rights advocacy. Elite Sky had become the most profitable airline in America, with customer satisfaction scores that consistently led the industry. The company's commitment to passenger dignity had created competitive advantages that demonstrated the business value of treating people with respect, regardless of their appearance or background. Marcus still flew Elite Sky regularly, often choosing to dress casually to test whether the cultural changes were authentic and lasting. Flight crews and airport staff now recognized him not just as a major shareholder, but as someone whose courage had transformed how the industry treated all passengers. On a recent flight to Chicago to visit his grandmother, Marcus encountered a young black professional who had been selected for additional security screening that seemed targeted and unnecessary. Marcus quietly intervened, using his influence to ensure fair treatment while connecting the traveler with passenger advocacy resources. "The work isn't finished," Marcus told Eleanor during that visit. "Bias still exists. Discrimination still happens, and people still need others to speak up when they witness injustice." Eleanor smiled with the pride of someone who had lived to see her values passed to the next generation and beyond. "Baby, you've given other people the courage to speak up for themselves and others. That's the most important thing anyone can do with success." The conversation reminded Marcus why the incident at Metropolitan Airport had been worth the humiliation and confrontation. His individual experience of discrimination had sparked changes that protected thousands of other travelers from similar treatment. Marcus's story had become more than just viral accountability. It was proof that dignity couldn't be taken away by someone else's prejudice, that success was measured by character as much as wealth, and that individual courage could create institutional transformation when combined with sustained commitment to justice. 6 months later, Elite Sky published its annual equality report showing 0 discrimination complaints for the first time in company history. Customer satisfaction had reached record levels, and employee surveys indicated the highest job satisfaction scores in the industry. Marcus received a letter from a young Latina student who had been inspired by his story to pursue a career in civil rights law. "Your dignity under pressure showed me that fighting injustice doesn't require anger. It requires courage, strategy, and commitment to helping others," she wrote. The final lesson of Marcus Thompson's experience was simple but powerful. Respect isn't earned through wealth or lost through prejudice. It belongs to every person by virtue of their humanity. When that respect is challenged, the response reveals not just individual character, but the values of the institutions and communities we create together. If you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere, you had every right to remember Marcus Thompson's story. And if you witness injustice happening to someone else, remember Amanda Foster's courage to speak up and document what she saw. Your voice matters. Your phone has power. Your witness can change everything. Subscribe to our channel if you believe dignity should never be for sale, and respect should never depend on what someone is wearing or how much money you think they have. Hit that notification bell because stories like this remind us that we're all human. We all deserve better, and we all have the power to create change when we choose courage over comfort. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters, their presence has value, and their dignity cannot be stripped away by someone else's prejudice. Because sometimes standing up doesn't just change one life, it changes an entire industry and reminds us all what justice looks like when it refuses to stay silent. The comment section is open. Tell us about a time you witnessed discrimination or had to stand up for what's right. Your stories matter. Your experiences count, and your courage inspires others to act when action is needed most. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring, and thank you for being the kind of person who believes that respect and dignity belong to everyone, not just people who look like what success is supposed to look like, because that's how we change the world. One story, one stand, one moment of courage at a time.